Hello and welcome. On behalf of GW Law's Environmental and Energy Law program, I would like to welcome you to today's program and to thank the audience for attending. I especially want to welcome our guest. He's GW Law alumnus, Chairman David Danner of the State of Washington's Utilities and Transportation Board. I wouldn't normally say State of Washington, but of course I'm talking here from Washington, D.C., and our guest is in the state of Washington. This is the last of in our series of discussions about careers in the environmental and energy area that we will be having this semester. We hope to pick this up again next semester. Tapes of these and the past interviews are available on our YouTube channel. You can search under YouTube for GW Law Environmental and Energy Law program, and you'll find the series as well as a lot of our other programming. For today's program, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer those as we go along. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Chairman David Danner. He was appointed chair of the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission in February 2013 by Governor Jay Inslee, who then reappointed him to a second term in December of 2018. Previously, he was the agency's executive director. He held that position from 2005, and then he was the secretary since 2008. Before that, he served as executive policy advisor to Washington Governor Gary Locke on energy, telecommunications, finance, and elections issues. In 2004, Governor Locke named Chairman Danner to the State Pollution Control Hearings Board and the Shoreline Hearings Board, where he served before moving on to the commission. Chairman Danner has also been a telecommunications attorney in private practice, counsel to the Washington Senate Energy and Utilities Committee, and senior policy advisor at the Washington State Department of Information Services. He serves on the board of directors of the National Association of Regulatory Utilities Commissioners, also known as NARUC, and the National Regulatory Research Institute. He's chair of the International Consortium of Energy Regulators and a member of the State Technology Services Board and the Executive Council of the National Council on Energy Policy. He also serves on advisory boards of the Critical Consumer Issues Forum, which sounds very interesting, and Center for Public Utilities at the New Mexico State University College of Business. Chairman Danner has a BA from Columbia University, an MA in Communications from the University of Washington, and a law degree from GW. So with that, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dave.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
I want to start off just by talking a little generally about the work of the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. I'm sorry, board.
Commission.
Commission. Okay. Who do you regulate? I know it's a little bit broader than in most other cases.
Yeah, so every state has a commission, a public utility commission of some sort that they started out as railroad commissions regulating the railroads back in the early 1900s. My commission was founded in 1905. Today, largely we regulate the electric and natural gas utilities, some legacy telecommunications, landlines especially, in the case of my commission, we do private water systems, private ferries, pipeline safety, railroad safety, household good movers, party buses, intrastate trucking, low-level nuclear waste, and I'm sure I'm missing solid waste. So I may have missed something along the lines, but it's a very broad portfolio.
That is extraordinarily broad compared to most state commissions. I'm sure it keeps things very interesting.
Oh boy, yes.
Could you please explain a little bit about your responsibilities as the chair and also the roles that lawyers fill in your agency?
Sure. Well, my responsibility of chair is, of course, I'm one of 3 commissioners in Washington, and state commissions vary. There are some with 7 and some with 5. Most have 3, I believe. And I'm the chair, which means I preside at the meetings of the commission and I set the agendas. Ultimately, the responsibility for the administration of my agency is delegated by the majority of the commissioners to an executive director, which is a role that I used to have. So my role is essentially, I'm a judge, I'm a policymaker, I'm a little bit of an administrator, and it's a mix of all those things. What is the role of lawyers in my agency? I can tell you uh, we are represented by the Office of the Attorney General, and there is a division of the AG's office that is the Utility and Transportation Division, and they are housed with our agency. There are about 10 lawyers, and my agency has about 160 employees, and we have about 10 lawyers that are serving us. We also have lawyers who are actually on our own staff who are administrative law judges that preside over the rate case hearings and other adjudications that we have. We also have lawyers on our regulatory staff, and these are the people that do analyses of rate filings. When a utility comes in and asks to raise their rates, we have to look at their books and see how they're doing. Because we are in the midst of a transition in energy where we're moving to carbon-free resources, trying to clean up the electric grid, trying to clean up the natural gas utilities, there's a lot of excitement about the stuff we're doing, and it's attracting people from a lot of different areas. And I've been really interested to see how many lawyers are interested in working for the commission at this time. And we brought 2 on staff just last week. So a lot of opportunities at our commission and commissions around the country.
Hiring is always good news for our students.
Yes, yes, that wasn't the case when I graduated from law school, I can tell you.
Yeah, but I have to say it's changed a lot. We have a lot of interest now in energy, and we see it, starting with students often before they even arrive, but certainly as 1Ls and later. Well, thank you. That's really helpful to understand what possibilities our students might have should they join you. Right now, the energy sector is under a lot of different pressures. We're sort of in this period of transition. Could you talk a little bit about some of the big issues that you're facing and how the commission's addressing them?
Well, thanks. Well, I think the big one in our state of Washington, actually, there are several states in the West and around the country where the legislature has said we need to reduce carbon emissions. The climate change is a big issue. It needs to be addressed. What are we doing in the energy sector to address it? In our state, we have a mandate that we have to be off of all coal resources by 2025. We have to be net carbon neutral by 2030 and 100% carbon free by 2045. That's in the electric sector. In the natural gas sector, the legislature hasn't put any mandates out, although it has a state carbon standard where the state as a whole has to reduce emissions to 90% of 1990 levels by 2050. But in the natural gas sector, they have assigned my commission to do a study that is due in mid-23 on the pathways for decarbonization of natural gas, which you can imagine is a very hard thing to do because natural gas is a fossil fuel that's sold for the purpose of being burned. So when you're looking at ways to reduce, do you electrify? Do you increase weatherization and energy efficiency? What are the pathways to that? So that's something we're exploring right now.
How do you make that balance? I mean, as a regulator, you have this responsibility to the gas utilities, you have this responsibility to the to the electric utilities. Do you just push it back to the legislature, or did you shed any light on how you manage
Sure.
that? Very tough.
Sure. Well, there's a number of things. First of all, we do have legislative mandates. When I was telling you about these, the 100% by 2045, for example, that came from the legislature. So that's a requirement. So our job is to ensure that the rates that are charged for services are fair, just, reasonable, and sufficient. What that means is we're not charging the ratepayer any more than they need to be charged. And we have to make sure that the companies make enough that they can continue to attract investment to provide reliable and safe service. And so we have to look at what are the lowest costs for producing electric services, and that the investments that companies are making are prudent. In this environment, they are required to make changes, like they have to get off coal, find new resources. And so we're always looking, how are you going to achieve that in the lowest reasonable cost manner? So that's the way that's what we're looking out for at all times. And yes, it is difficult. When you're a natural gas utility, at this point, there are no legislative mandates on them, but there are things that we do look at. When we're looking at lowest reasonable costs, we're actually imputing a social cost of carbon, for example, into our calculations on economics. Now, not all commissions around the country are doing that. In fact, I think very few are, if any others. But that's one of the things we're looking at, because we're economic regulators, but we want to make sure that we're bringing into our economic calculations all the things that matter, and that we move forward on this energy transition, because it's very important.
That's really fascinating because you're right. I don't think there are very many that are doing that. Where can you elaborate a little bit on how you're using the social cost of carbon, where it comes into play?
Well, sure. When you look at relative resources, you want the utilities to look for the lowest cost resources. So you don't want them going out and gold plating, and nuclear is way out of the money right now. But if they're looking at, well, is a gas plant cheaper than a coal plant? All right, fine. They're going to look at all the various costs, and then we're asking them also, okay, now put in a social cost of carbon, and we use the one that the federal social cost of carbon, the one that was put in place before President Trump. But and generally what that means is, when you're comparing something like a gas plant to wind, you'll find that wind won't have the same social cost of carbon because it doesn't emit carbon. And so it just means that you're getting a more accurate, in my mind, comparison of what the costs really are between those two resources.
Really interesting. Just a complete aside, I'm going to make a plug here for the fact that in May, we're going to be having a conference on nuclear energy, particularly looking at the fuel supply chain and looking at it from an environmental social governance, ESG type of framework, and thinking about what needs to be done to the supply chain to kind of bring it into the line of, meeting, I guess, becoming a greener resource. Because I think there's a good story to be told there, but it's one that, if we're going to embrace all these different new technologies in the future, we need to look at those issues. We need to pay attention to them and looking at the whole supply chain. So, yeah, right now it's out of the money, but who knows? Who knows?
Well, and actually there are so many new technologies coming down in nuclear, so many developments there's some exciting stuff going on. And so I can't tell you where things are going to be a decade from now.
Well, we're hoping that this conference will help people take a look at that. And we're going to be thinking about those new technologies and what their supply chains are going to look like and how we make sure it's as green as it can possibly be.
Right.
So going back to the matters that, that are before you right now. We didn't talk at all about diversity, inclusion, and equity, but I know that's something that's been, on everybody's minds these days. Anything that your commission's been doing, thinking about in those lines?
Yeah, we are incredibly active in this front. The legislature gave us some direction the session before last, and basically what we're trying to do is we are trying to get equity considerations built into every decision that we make. When you're citing a facility, are you putting it in neighborhoods where you're disproportionately affecting people of color? When you use language in bills, are your policies, are they just? Are you looking at it from an equity framework? And of course, we're doing it in our own, within the agency, in terms of our hiring policies, the way we are dealing with customer. We have a call center that deals with customer complaints. We are now doing language interpretation in several different languages. But all of these things are we're trying to build it into the DNA of our agency. It is very exciting. We recently did a rule on providing funding to historically underrepresented groups to participate in our proceedings. A lot of times to intervene in a rate case can be a very expensive proposition. And there are social justice groups that they want to learn how, and they need the resources to help them, but we think that their viewpoints are very important. We want to hear those viewpoints in our proceedings. So we're trying to make it easier for them to participate.
That's just so heartening to hear. I mean, we have such a loss of human capital when we capture people and, by excluding them. And so breaking down those barriers just makes us all richer, I think. So I'm really, really excited to hear that. sorry, not that I have any say in this, but I just can't help reacting about, "Oh, that's fantastic. And I know our students are excited about those issues."
No, I think it is too. We are actually also looking at low income tariffs, which is something that the legislature
Yeah.
required us to do. So we have 2 rate cases in the door right now, and low income tariffs will be part of those rates when we're done.
I want to also talk about new technologies that are coming down the road and where you are. Just perhaps as a lead in on that, have you thought at all yet about electric vehicles and access of low-income communities to electrification, whether it's places to charge, access to electric transport, buses, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we certainly have. With regard to electric vehicles, we actually put out a policy statement. Um, our utilities are required to submit EV charging plans to us. Where are they going to build out? Um, who do they hope to serve? Are they overbuilding for we're using ratepayer money to help them build out some of their charging infrastructure. Um, because we have a chicken and egg thing here where we need to get the charging stations out there before people will buy the cars. But we want people to buy the cars because in Washington, transportation is the highest source of carbon emissions, and we need to reduce that. But we want to make sure that if we're using ratepayer money, that ratepayers as a whole are getting a benefit. It's not just a subsidy for rich Tesla owners, but it's actually a benefit to the community at whole. So yes, you're talking, when you mentioned mass transit, that's one of the things we're looking at. Pollution reduction in these neighborhoods, noise reduction in these neighborhoods. The policies, the pricing policies, there are questions. A lot of the charging stations will put a timer on there that you have this many minutes to charge your car, and you better be back here by that time. And then they start charging you $1 a minute until you show up. Well, I wanted to look at, you talk about social justice. If you're a parent with 3 kids and you're traipsing around the mall trying to get back to your car, I just want to show a little mercy there. But yes, EVs is a big part of what we're doing now. It's surprising because 5 years ago it was not even on the radar.
Oh, yeah, no, I know completely. And it is a big problem. I mean, I live in the city and my neighbors have an electric car. And so the cord goes snaking down their front steps and across the sidewalk. Because when you live in the city, it's
Hmm.
not like you have a garage you can pull into. And if you live in an area where you don't even have that accessibility, multifamily dwellings, for example,
Yes.
then those
Well,
are the
and
folks that are going to need those chargers and have to get back there in time too.
yeah, and we're developing policies. How do you deal with multi-unit dwellings like apartments so we haven't got all the answers yet, but we have people looking at it.
That's fantastic. How about some of the other new technologies? I mean, you're sitting there on the edge of the coast. Are you thinking about offshore wind, tidal power,
Sure.
hydrogen, anything else?
Well, and this is an area where we're not going to be making those kinds of decisions. The decisions are going to be made by the utilities, and then it's our job to come in and say, is that a prudent investment? So we need to look at, are you creating risk? Is this a proven technology? How expensive is it? How much how much electricity can it actually provide? So offshore is still very new out there. There's a lot of interest in offshore wind off the Pacific. It's very deep water off the shore, so it's different challenges than you would find off of New Jersey or off of Massachusetts. But there is a lot of interest. Now, what I'm also finding, though, is because there are a lot of tribal lands and federal lands, that there are a lot of management issues. How do you deal with sovereign nations in terms of permitting? So all of those things have to be worked out. And eventually for us as regulators, it's going to come down to, is this a cost-effective resource? And so we'll have to look at that. Storage, of course, there's still a lot of development in storage. Again, it comes down to, storage is a little difficult because you don't price it the same way you would a generation resource. It has other attributes and other benefits. And it has been a struggle to try and figure out what the value of storage is. But that is something else we're looking at. People are looking at hydrogen. They're looking at renewable natural gas, which is basically landfill gas or other kinds of biogas. And some of them are in play already. We do have renewable natural gas being used by some of our utilities blended in. But we're looking at all of these things. But ultimately, as I said, that's going to be a decision by the utility. And then it's our job to look and see if it's cost effective compared to other resources. And when the legislature says you must have certain carbon reductions, then basically we still have to compare costs between, is wind better than solar? What are the cost comparisons? And offshore wind, of course, will be part of that mix too when it comes our way.
Yeah, it's so much fun watching watching the technologies develop. I mean, I don't know what's going to be out there. I don't know how fast the battery technologies are going to
Mhm.
improve. There's just so many variables, and it's part of what keeps this industry exciting from my perspective.
Oh
But from
yeah,
my perspective, of course, you always have to judge the risks.
yeah, and we're looking at. I mean, we have pump storage as something that is under development out here too, where they're filling reservoirs that are up the hill and then use gravity to bring it down when they need the power, and when the power is cheaper, they pump the water up the hill. I mean, there's just a lot of exciting stuff going on in the energy world right now as we're trying to figure out how to reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah, going back to the offshore wind, we're now teaching a course on that, precisely because it is such an interesting blend of it's environmental, it's energy, but yes, they're also dealing with tribal lands, commercial fishermen, risks. It's just got so much of everything in it. And a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you know this, but we have two alums who are working at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And so they
Oh,
also gave us the pleasure of an interview. So I've been learning a lot about offshore wind.
well, it's offshore wind it's new. There's so much potential out there because there is so much wind.
And it's close to loads. It's off the coast where people happen to live, so it's very
Right,
handy.
right.
I just want to remind our participants that if you do have questions, put them into the Q&A. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about your career path. I know it hasn't been linear, and I think it would be interesting to find out how you got to where you are.
Boy, thank you. I came to law school actually with a real interest in journalism. And I actually intended to graduate from law school and go into journalism. In fact, I did. I worked for the Associated Press for a few years after I graduated from GW. Um, and but from there, because I was interested in First Amendment, at some point I was attracted to go work for a public interest telecommunications firm. And I did telecommunications law there, and then at a private firm in DC for a few years. I was never really thinking I was going to go into energy at all. I went back to my native state of Washington, where I worked for the state Senate on telecommunications issues as counsel to the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And then Governor Locke hired me as his telecommunications advisor, and he said, oh, by the way, your portfolio also includes energy. And shortly after, a couple years after I started with him and I'd focused on telecom for a few years, the California energy crisis of 2000 and 2001 hit in a big way. And I found myself on a very quick learning curve to try and deal with this crisis, where we had, energy in Washington State that was selling for $5,000 a megawatt hour at that time. We had a lot of businesses that were on the verge of going bankrupt because they had decided to go buy on the market. And we had a historic drought at the same time, so our hydroelectric dams weren't producing anything. It was a very interesting time, but boy, I learned a lot about energy. I still think telecommunications is interesting, but it doesn't compare to energy. Energy is really where it's happening. Don't tell my telecom friends
I'm
that.
delighted to hear that, but
So yeah, it was. I did not take any energy or environmental courses when I was at GW. Of course, I took some classes with Jerome Barron, who was a big First Amendment scholar, and that's really where I was intending to go, and that's where the first part of my career went, but it just veered off course after I got involved in energy.
Well, it's good to know that having a broad base gets you, you get to have choices as you move on. You
Sure.
start off with that good foundation, and
Yep. Life is what happens when you're making other plans.
so one last shot here for any of our participants. If you have any questions, I think that otherwise we're coming close to wrapping up our 30 minutes. Anything else you'd like to share with students about what they ought to be thinking about as they move onwards with their careers, starting out?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, you know, while you're in law school, follow your interests. I think that if you're interested in energy and economics or climate, pursue that, but be open because opportunities will come your way. I think um, it's really important to just, if you find it interesting, go for it.
I think those are fantastic words to end on. Dave, thank you so much for participating today. I really appreciate this. We're going to have it out on our YouTube channel, so you might be getting comments in the future as well from people who listen to it. And I just really am so happy and proud to have you as part of our GW alumni group. It's a rich, very rich area.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Donna. I appreciate it. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
It's always fun to talk to you. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.